I want to thank everybody for being here. I am so excited. I mean, how amazing is this new center for anyone who was here last year? Very excited about it. In that regard, it was a real pleasure and some of you I may have met last year. If I haven't, I'm Ashley Koff. I'm a registered dietitian, and I'm really, really passionate about organic produce. And one of the things that brings me back here every year is to really figure out how we can all collaborate better together to see just the proliferation, the access, the delicious enjoyment of everything that you all work on daily. So first and foremost, thank you for everything that you do. And second of all, I have some additional thank yous, which are our sponsors. The session sponsor is Missionero, and our AV sponsor is Origin O. So thank you to any of you that are with them, and thank you on that part for them joining us. So the lay of the land is such. If you need coffee, if you need to go to the bathroom, go ahead and head out, but you're not going to want to miss much of this because I've got some really awesome individuals here with me today. And I'm really excited about the content that we're going to be able to share. We are here from 8 to 8:50, 5-0. And at that point, we've got a jet outside because we have the next group coming in. Some of you guys might be staying for the 9 o'clock session, and that's totally fine. You don't have to leave. But with that said, please allow the speakers to go outside. If you have any follow-up questions, we can move into the other room over there. And they're each kind enough to give us another 10 or 15 minutes at that point. And we don't want to detract from the other sessions. So, and then I think the other part that's important to note is we will have a Q&A. We would love for it to be a robust Q&A. So going into this session, I spoke with both of our speakers. I have questions that I wanted to have answered, so selfishly I get to go with those first, and that's what you guys are going to hear about. But I hope that you have your questions prepared and as they come up, and we will have a Q&A. We'll move into it. I'll just have you raise your hand so that one of the fabulous people in the orange peachish t-shirts can come over and bring the microphone around on that part. And is everybody's cell phones like silenced or low stun or buzz? Okay, good. So we don't want to have that going on. Okay, so now I get to go. I'm going to advance. There we go. We really don't have any slides going on, so I'm going to, the good news about that just means that we're just going to chat and everybody can focus on my lovely guests that are here today. So as I said, I am Ash Koff. I'm a registered dietitian. I happen to be what I call a better health enabler. I'm trying to help everyone get and keep their better health. I believe that happens, namely by being powered by better nutrition. My company is the Better Nutrition Program. And I think one of the reasons that I wanted to be here to talk about and talk with these members of the media is that last year, and in the past years, a lot of questions have come up about different conversations. How can we share information with the media? What's the best way to do that? And really, how does the media work as it relates to the industry? And so I could think of nobody better than the two individuals. I kind of feel like I scored 100 on today's invitation with the two guests that we have here today. So just a show of hands, if you've ever read the New York Times or online. You don't have to admit it. It's okay. Great. Awesome. Okay, good. So our guest here, there you go. Exactly. Anahad is an author and a reporter. He's extremely passionate about health, was in New York City for a long time, and then relocated to the Bay Area. So he's one of your locals now out here. We are thrilled to have him talk a good bit about today about print media and reporting and how we can really just hear from him about how the better stories that we've read in the New York Times and that are, and also how that interacts with social media. So thrilled to have you here today. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
And I'm not going through extensive bios because you have them, so do your job and read the bios if you need to know anything more about these individuals. We're going to introduce them more thoroughly in a moment. Laura, dear friend of mine from Washington, D.C., but actually before that was out here. She's an Emmy Award-winning journalist, president and founder of Laura Evans Media. So what we have in Laura is the ability to talk to someone who has both been doing it for quite some time in terms of both on the East Coast, the West Coast, national media, as well as now working with companies, working with individuals to be able to help them with their, not just develop media, but really take a strategic approach to accomplishing what you want to accomplish in the media. And sometimes it's even things like knowing how to put on your lab right. And so she helped me with that this morning. So I'm very grateful.
It's now coming apart.
And now it's falling apart because
we'll
I just
work on
touched it. But that's okay on that part. Okay. So I thought by, and now I'm going to, got one more. I said thank you to our sponsors already, so Matt can be very pleased with me. And now we're going to move on to, I thought by way of introduction, it would be great to actually ask these two individuals about what you think, what are your thoughts on organic produce, and really what has influenced those thoughts. So I'm going to go with you first, Anahad. What are your thoughts?
I mean, it's a broad question. There's a lot I could say on that topic, but obviously I'm a big fan of organic produce. Consume it daily. One of the biggest customers of organic produce, nice. I would say. And I like to write about it when possible. And clearly, I think there's an increasing consumer demand for it as well. So as a journalist, I'm interested in it as well.
Great. I think that's such a great, in case anyone missed that, he said, I would like to write about it when possible. So part of what we're going to dive into today is what makes that possible, right? Okay, yeah. Laura, how about yourself?
And I would say, I echo what Anahad said, but I'm also a mother of three, and one of my children is here with us today. And I, as a journalist and as a mom, also a consumer of organic foods, but very curious as a journalist to find out more, and having told many stories, was always trying to dig in a little bit more, and never really felt like I got to the bottom of it, and met a lot of resistance. I know we'll get into this a little bit more. Met a lot of resistance with my supervisors and managers of the newsroom to try to tell these stories. So. But huge fan of organic food. Yeah. Still trying to find my way.
Yeah, excellent. So needing support, trying to figure out how to navigate it, both as a consumer and then also from a media standpoint in the press. So let's dive right in with, so we did a pre-call, and I thought this was one of the things that resonated so much in my mind, especially sitting here in beautiful Monterey and saying that we love organic produce, and my freezer is stocked with it and I love to go get it, but then turning around and saying like, how can we get it on the media? And you shared a story about, you don't have to name names so that nobody goes after, but about how, when you talk about that resistance that you faced with wanting to actually talk about organic, and share it in the media coverage, you faced an issue. Tell us a little bit about that.
So, and not to be completely honest, so I worked for the local Fox affiliate in Washington, D.C. Now, local Fox is very different from national Fox. Let me just put that out there right now. But our general manager, we would sit in the editorial meetings, and I pitched, variety of different stories every day. But as the consumer reporter at one point, I had pitched a story about covering organic foods, and his reaction was almost visceral. He said, "That's one of the biggest scams in the world. I just don't want to do a story on organic foods." And every time I brought it up, he did not want to cover a story about organic foods. And I thought, we need more education. If the general manager of a Fox O&O, owned and operated station, is this angry and uneducated about what organic foods are, then we need to dig in. He's completely closed off about it. So to me, that was a big red flag. We need to educate, and that was what I was looking to do as a journalist, and I know you do it on a regular basis, was to educate my viewers. I wanted to educate him as well.
Yeah. So I think that's so important, and Anahad, I want to come over to you in that space, because I think that comment about media being that education tool and that opportunity to educate. For those of us as a healthcare practitioner, one of the things that I find is a lot of my clients coming in, my patients coming in, I'd say that they suffer from what I call infobesity. And heck, I feel like I suffer from infobesity. One day it's like coffee's great for you and it's a great day for me. Another day something comes out and coffee's not good for you and I just want to put the paper away, and it's like you come back to. And so in this era of different information and those pieces, and really what Laura's saying is the general manager needs someone to take them along the path with reliable information that he can then trust, and that is part of that education piece. So getting to a question on that part, when you think about your role in wanting to educate, how is your role as a print reporter, how do you identify the topics that you want to and that you're able to then educate people on?
Well, I think when it comes to this topic, it's It's confusing for a lot of consumers because, as you said, there's so much conflicting information out there. And I think as a result, it's also conflicting or confusing for journalists because, when I think of, doing a story about, we get questions from our readers about, what does organic mean and what's the difference between organic and conventional produce, which, produce doesn't make sense to buy organic because obviously, a lot of people are, price sensitive and organic can be more expensive than conventional. So, I can't buy all of my produce organic. Which ones, should I invest in when it comes to buying organic versus conventional? There's just so much confusion, and I've seen that from reader questions. But I think for journalists, it's difficult because, at the New York Times, when I'm working on a story like this, one thing I like to do is to find, the experts. Where are the sources of information where I can get, reliable, independent information. But when I've dug into this topic, it's hard to know, okay, who can I trust? What are the sources I can trust? When it comes to an issue like coffee, for example, where there's a lot of conflicting studies that are published, I can dig into that and say, okay, these studies are more reliable because they're published in, certain credible journals. I know there are researchers at Harvard or at Brigham and Women's, Hospital and other places who've been studying this, this coffee issue for a long time, and I can go to them and interview them and talk to them to make sense of all the conflicting studies out there and, sort of get their sense on the full body of the literature. But when it comes to organic produce versus conventional produce, GMOs, this issue, they're very controversial, and there are, I would say a lot of dogs in this fight, and it's hard for journalists to know, okay, who can I go to trust to get independent, reliable, expert information?
Do you feel like, following up on that, do you feel like you have to prove a difference? So one of the challenges I find with organic is it can be the absence of certain negatives, right? Which is a harder way to say. So just for the person who's saying like, okay, I want this choice because I believe it's better for the farmland, or I want the option of something that is lower in certain pesticides and herbicides. And I am at a place where whether I'm purchasing frozen, which happens to be more approachable price point, or ready to eat, but I'm able to do that part. Do you think that the job in these stories is about proving that it is the nugget and what you need to prove that it's better, or is there a storyline that can be talking about why this, confirming or validating that this is an acceptable choice? Because I think what Laura was sharing is that her boss at the time felt like this is a scam, right? So disproving a scam or saying hype, like we always hear, is it hype, or is it actually on that part? So what do you think in terms of that coverage?
I would try to approach a story like that without an agenda. So I would frame it as, first of all, what I would want is the data on the trends. It seems like more and more Americans are interested in consuming organic produce because there's at least discussion of greater benefits around them, fewer pesticides or different kinds of pesticides. So I would want to get the trend data, and I would start by, and I think this is one of the issues for the organic industry is what is the clearinghouse for data on organic produce. So since I'm not aware of that, I would go to, for example, Nielsen to get data and say, I have a suspicion that Americans are consuming more organic produce. What are the trends? Are there certain types of fruits and vegetables that Americans are increasingly purchasing? And then I would sort of frame a story around what are the trends going on in the country when it comes to organic produce. And then I would try to dig into the literature and actually find scientists who are studying this and could speak with some authority on what are the benefits of organic versus non-organic.
And I think that's why it makes it so difficult for TV, is because there's no consistency and it's so nuanced. And so I think where my general manager got so caught up was that he wants what is organic, there's one blanket thing, and he wants a non-nuanced story, easy to tell, one-stop shopping. and it's not that. And so it's a complicated story, like you're saying. You know, you've got to find sources to trust, and it's hard.
Well, and it's interesting. So going from print now into television, right? And there's a play with social media that we'll get into. With Anahad, he's talking about a lot of the research and how I can go in. I love he says, I'm not going to start with an agenda. It's always good to remember that, you know, and I'm going to go in and look at that. You have a very different thing that you need to do. You need to have it look good. You need to have somebody who can actually communicate and talk about it. So run through what could actually.
Gotta be sexy.
Yeah. So there you go. So what makes a sexy organic produce segment, Laura?
Organic produce is not sexy, but
right.
there are ways to make it sexy.
Yeah.
And you know, frankly, when you talk about GMOs, I mean, and you talk about stuff that's controversial, then you start to get kind of sexy. I mean, if you go to, I mean, it almost starts to sound, you can make it a little sleazy. And so, you know, dig to the bottom of the barrel, and then, you know, come in at it backwards, and then you make it interesting. So what is, and you kind of got to think like a dirty TV producer, you know, and that's why
think like a dirty TV producer.
And that's why the Environmental Working Group. That's why they produce, you know, the Dirty Dozen,
right?
Because that's kind of sexy, or like, you know, people will say like, what are the 5 things that are going to kill you, or you know, the bacteria on your drinking glasses. So what are the things that you need to watch out for as a consumer? What is the produce that we need to be careful of, you know, and find the 5 things, or the, you know, the number of things that consumers can look for.
And who's the person? Like, do you want to hear from the farmer? Do you want to hear, should it be somebody local?
Yeah, the human interest story.
Okay.
Go to what's relevant for the consumer, but it's got to come to the consumer. It's got to be a story that the consumer cares about, not just industry. So if there's a story about a farmer who is working hard in the, you know, in the soil and has a great story to tell, make that the first part of the story. Or the mom who's shopping, make that the first part of the story. And you have to serve it up on a silver platter. But you need something sexy. It's gotta be a sexy story.
I'm going to ask you to now change your hat for a moment, because first, now you're talking about the dirty TV producer, and I'd like you to now talk about actually helping somebody. So in your role now at Laura Evans Media, you're helping people, you know, we call it media training, or there's that piece of it. So if you have a farmer, or you have a vice president of a company, or you know, somebody who's doing the marketing, how do you help them? How do you help them be somebody who's on television and can communicate those points? Because I think that's what you're saying, is like they need to be that vehicle. You know, is it looking the part? Is it talking the part? Like, what are some of the pieces?
It's all of that. It's what's the messaging. So and it's simplifying your message. So if you're, you know, what is organic food, and I keep talking numbers. So like, you know, the 3 things of your message that you want to get across, simplifying that. What's your story? When you figure out what the story is that you want to tell, what's the human interest piece? What's the main gist of the story? But you've got to deliver the human interest piece, the featured part that will be sold. So a TV station, especially TV, and maybe it's the same for you too.
Absolutely,
you need the human piece. You've got to have the human element in order for a reporter to have their audience be affected by that story. Why does the audience care about this? It's not just because, you know, we want to buy organic foods. It's because we want Sally Mae at home to relate to the person in the story, and you know, to be drawn in. So you've got to refine the message and make it simple and easy to understand, and especially in a TV story where we're taught to write to an 8th grade level, it's got to be super simple, not nuanced, simple.
So sometimes those stories just happen for us, and that can be an awesome thing. You know, maybe there is the release of a study, and it says that, wow, when you have an organic berry, it has more of the antioxidants and it's well measured, and somebody, backs up that information, and it's great. Sometimes, unfortunately, those stories happen, and we'll call them more like the plane crash analogy. And coming over to something that we talked about, where unfortunately there is an outbreak, an E. coli outbreak, or there's something that happens within the world of produce. We're not even talking about organic or not on that part. And yet, to your point, the media loves to cover those things, right? And so when I was talking to Anahat about this in our pre-call, he had a great analogy. I'm just going to borrow it. Is it an analogy, or is it? Anyway, he said, there are so many, on a daily basis, there are safe landings, right? Many of us flew here. Thankfully, we're all here safely. There are all these safe landings, but what gets the attention is the crash. And so one of the things that I want to talk a little bit about are media strategies and understanding. So first of all, those crashes are going to happen. As we have seen at different times, they can take down whole groups of, whether it's food companies or whether it's products or ingredients on that part. And so with just an acknowledgement to that, you had some great thoughts on how to navigate the space of communication around hey, but we have a lot of safe landings on a frequent basis. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that's, it's a great point, and I think that a lot of people in the industry worry about, okay, there's a E. coli outbreak with lettuce. This is going to be so terrible, and obviously it's going to attract a lot of media attention, and reporters, journalists, we flock to those stories in part because those are the stories that people want to read. If there, is a plane crash, somewhere in America, then people want to know what happened. What was the airline? And of course, people are, freaked out a little bit at first, and people are concerned. It attracts a lot of headlines, but by and large, people don't stop flying. We still need to fly, just like a car crash. If there's a crash in your neighborhood, you want to know what happened, but you're not going to stop, driving or using your car. And so those, stories are sensational. People want to read about them, but there have been a lot of outbreaks linked to lettuce, but I've never met anyone who said that they don't eat lettuce because there have been outbreaks in the past, maybe for a little bit, but eventually those stories recede. And so I think for the industry, a big thing is to focus on telling the positive stories. As a journalist at the Times, I and my colleagues, we get a lot of pitches from various PR people and from different industries. And I don't really hear much from the organic industry. So, I can go through my inbox and point out, emails from the Dairy Institute, pitching me stories about trends with dairy, or from the Egg Board, or from, the Cattlemen's Association, from the American Beverage Association. But I don't really get any pitches from the organic or produce industry. And I think, Laura made a great point earlier, which is that, we like to tell stories, and there are certain components that we like. The human interest angle is huge. So recently, I cover nutrition, and I've written a lot of stories about, the debates over macronutrients, low carb versus, low fat, gluten-free, all these things. And in covering these stories, I've been writing a lot about diabetes and people doing low carb diets. And I noticed that a lot of people on low carb diets were, I'd ask them what they were eating, and they kept mentioning cauliflower. Cauliflower pizza, cauliflower muffins, because it's a great substitute for refined carbohydrates and white flour. And so I thought, wow, this is really catching on. We've all heard about these cauliflower recipes and cauliflower pizza, and when I shop at Whole Foods, I would increasingly see cauliflower products. So I just started digging into it. Reached out to Nielsen to get data on cauliflower, and they said, yeah, this is a huge trend. We're seeing huge increases in sales of cauliflower in the produce aisle, cauliflower in the frozen section, cauliflower products, cauliflower baby foods. So I ended up writing a story about it, and I needed, I had the trend data from Nielsen, and I needed a human interest story, a human interest angle. So I found out about this cauliflower brand. I think it was called Cauliflower Pizza, and found out that it was started by a mom who had 2 kids with celiac disease, and they couldn't eat regular pizza, but they wanted their pizza, and so she didn't like the cauliflower options that were available, and so she just started making her own at home with a recipe she was experimenting with. And she turned it into this multi-million-dollar brand, and I thought, that's a great story.
That's a
This
great
mom
story.
with two kids with celiac, they can't eat regular pizza. She, created her own brand of, cauliflower pizza, and that was the lead for, the story that I ended up writing that ran in the Tuesday Science and Health section on, the cauliflower trend and how it appeals to people who are, doing low-carb diets, doing gluten-free diets, people who just want to eat more vegetables, who say I'd rather eat a cauliflower crust than a regular
And that
crust.
too is where, like, I feel like the organic industry could step in and say, here's where, there's a big trend, but organics is doing it this way. And kind of, jump in the middle of something and say, but we're here doing it in a better way. There's I don't know.
Absolutely.
Would you grab a
Absolutely.
story on
Well,
that?
because you might
Yeah,
have someone
of
like
course.
myself in there that turns around and says, well, if your child had celiac disease, you have to understand that until it was diagnosed or through this time period, there's been irritation and inflammation in the gut. And so one of the things you want to do is reduce their intake of herbicides and pesticides. And one of the ways to do that is to look for an organic version of the cauliflower.
Yeah.
And then we suddenly have a story that
Right.
he
Yeah.
runs, you put on TV, and, and
There you
there we
go.
go on
And
that
it's,
part.
and it's great
Yeah.
too, because one of the things I like to do for our readers is to provide what I call news you can use. And so if people are thinking, oh, cauliflower is great, I need to eat more of this. Okay, here's what you need to know. Maybe you should look for the organic because
Right.
Ashley Koff, a registered dietitian, says there are some issues there if your kid has celiac and you're just eating the conventional
Right.
version.
Yeah.
So
And
there's
it's
a lot of elements you can
challenging.
include
I
in
think
there.
you were talking about the Dirty Dozen on that part, and one of the challenges that we have in that space is like those things can be really sexy and helpful to your point, but they're really unhelpful if you don't eat a lot of the things that are on the Dirty Dozen list. It's not an excuse to turn around. Like, so for example, what I want people to eat more of organic is what goes in them or on them more often, because that's going to have a greater impact. So sometimes there can be that counterbalance. Both of you in different ways brought up the PR, the public relations. You were mentioning that you hear from the Egg Board, the Almond Board, like all of these boards by way of press releases. Are those maybe pros and cons? Like, are they helpful? Are they challenging? How do you, what is good or what gets a press release noticed? So would love some thoughts on that.
Well, I would get hundreds of press releases a day, so you're looking for opportunities to delete, and deleting is a more often exercise than not. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I would say that the days of even reading press releases are emails are really. And developing relationships with reporters is a really good thing to do. If you can do that, I would highly recommend that. Develop a relationship with Anahad and know that, you can do that even finding a reporter on Twitter or on Facebook who covers your issue, and over time, building that trust, building that relationship, so you can say, hey, I've got a story, hey, I've got a source for you, helping them out, making it really easy for them, instead of just shooting off a press release and hoping that they're going to cover it, because the likelihood of that is probably not very high.
And usually, a lot of times too, it's the agency that then is sending it out. So it's not, to your point, it's not even coming from the individual, which
Yeah,
maybe
I mean, you're saying, here, do the work.
yeah.
With a press release, here, do the work. But I mean, you want to find out the latest stuff. But I think resources are so slim. You're overloaded with a ton of information coming in. I mean, I don't want to speak for you, but
No, you're
I don't know.
absolutely right. I think it's the same for both the print side and the television side. I get hundreds of press releases every day, just like you, and I'm constantly trying to delete them. But at the same time, I don't usually write stories off of a press release.
Yeah.
But if I see, these names in my inbox, then when I am ready to do a story about cauliflower, for example, I'll say, oh yeah, I know there is, a cauliflower board or, an organic produce media person, and I'll just do a search through my inbox and say, okay, this is someone I should reach out to. So for example, when I was doing that cauliflower story and I wanted the trend data, I thought, okay, well, I get a lot of email pitches from Nielsen. They're always sending me data about, consumer trends in the supermarkets. So let me reach out to them and see if they have something. So I just knew who the media person was, even though I generally am not writing about all I'm not writing all or covering all the news pitches that they're sending me. At least now I know who to contact when I do need someone. And also Laura is right about developing relationships with journalists. There are PR people that I talk to, and I know I can trust them, and they give me good information. And so when I have a story where I think they can be helpful, I'll reach out to them. And it's I just have a lot of sources.
So both of you also brought up social media a bit, and is it something that you feel, so as brands or as the industry, how can someone be connecting with you in social media and using social media more intelligently? Obviously, there's the consumer side, right, of what they're trying to accomplish in that space, but in that relationship building or being seen as an expert or any of those pieces, what are some of the success stories that you've experienced with the way that with social media in that way?
So I think social media, I think different journalists have different opinions on it. And they're different preferred social media outlets. So, as Laura was saying, as a journalist, your inbox tends to be cluttered with news pitches, and you just end up deleting a lot of them in bulk. And so I end up actually, going to Twitter and looking at news there. And when people reach out to me on Twitter, they're actually much more likely to get a response from me because my inbox is just so cluttered, just nothing but, I'd say about 90% pitches, that if someone reaches out to me on Twitter and says, hey, I saw you did this story recently about XYZ, would love to chat with you sometime about, this other topic I think you might be interested in, then they're probably more likely to get a response from me because I do check in to Twitter multiple times a day, more than I probably should. But and then Facebook, I tend not to spend too much time on there. I just prefer Twitter, and it's a good place. I've definitely developed relationships with other folks in media or in PR or in different industries on Twitter.
What about in LinkedIn? I've been hearing more and more about like that LinkedIn. Maybe the way that it's set up, but it's more of a B2B and a really good way to interact if you have more of the substantive. Like I guess there's less of the marketing piece as much on that part. Do you find that or?
Absolutely. I actually have a meeting with someone next week who runs an organization called Morning Consult, which I guess puts out a lot of trends and consumer data. But he reached out to me on LinkedIn. That's another site where, I feel like Facebook, when I log on, it's just completely cluttered with notifications. When I go into my inbox, it's cluttered with notifications. But LinkedIn, when I go there, I just have a few, notifications. And so if someone sends me a message there, then I am also more likely to respond there as well. I'd say I probably get about, maybe 2 or 3 pitches a week on LinkedIn versus hundreds a day in your inbox.
The path of least resistance.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, but social media these days for television, it's social media that drives what's being put on TV. So if it's something that is sexy, like I said, or can travel on social media that is clickable, then they'll put it on TV. So why is organic better? Why is this family choosing organic over conventional? And if that's getting a lot of attention, then that's something that will be shown, usually in the 5 o'clock hour because that's when mom or dad is, making dinner. But in our newsroom, we had these big jumbotrons where they're now monitoring what the engagement is with each news person, and it's like the top 8 people who are performing in the market, how they're engaging with people on likes and comments and stuff. So social media is a really big part of news these days. So. Journalists are definitely on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, and that's a great way to engage.
And as you, again, asking you to wear 2 hats, as you flip it the other way in your work with both individuals and working with companies, how are you helping them develop that sort of strategic media approach then of both social media and outreach? Like, is there something that you'll say, hey, this is going to be better for print, and we should try to work on this piece versus this would be better for TV? Is radio dead? Like, how do you figure out where the messaging should be?
Yeah, I mean, it's all just kind of part of a larger strategy in terms of educating, in terms of getting the message out, to have a journalist see it, to have the greater population see it, to plant the seed so that Anahad would say, oh, I saw that, and when going to write a story, I remember that, and I want to get back to that. It's just a constant output of information. So the greater your presence is on social media, the greater the messages, the simpler the messages, the more refined the messages, the larger your presence and the more opportunity you have to get your voice heard in this cacophony of noise. And I think it's just a machine that continues to go down the road, and you need to stay at it.
Okay, so we have about 15 minutes. I want to be very clear that we have just gotten some very specific instructions, so I hope that all of you are paying attention. You should make sure that you're following Anahad on Twitter and on LinkedIn, as well as Laura Evans, and sending them relevant information, cultivating relationships. And also that you guys need to do a better job. I mean, that's what we're hearing, which is we need to figure out a way for the organic produce. I say we because as a healthcare practitioner, when I'm sitting with someone and talking to them about organic, it helps me a lot more if you guys are doing the work of also talking to the media and providing that information. So with that said, did anything stir a question? I have a few more questions of my own, but I want to make sure I give time. And we've got some microphones that... Are you asking people? Oh, you're going to run them around. Good. All right. So who has a question? And please, a question, not a personal story. Great. So we've got one over there and one up here. And if you're loud, you can also stand up and just yell. Yes. Yeah. That's okay. We love you to have the microphone. There you go. We'll hand it. Stand up. Yeah.
Thank you. I did have one question. We touched on a lot of social media, but it is the food industry, and Instagram is a huge social media outlet for food. And I know maybe not so much for news, because Twitter is obviously very easy to get a lot of condensed information very quickly. But what are your thoughts on Instagram as far as maybe a media or a way to reach out as well? Or could be.
I like Instagram. I mean, I think they're all, you serve a different audience with Instagram. I like all of them. I think it's a great way to, it's obviously visual. So there are certain people that gravitate toward Instagram. There are certain people who are, newsy and are on Twitter, but absolutely. And then you can direct message people that way too. But you'll find some journalists who are huge users of Instagram, and it's usually, sometimes it's the younger journalists, and they have a certain shtick. But there's no social media platform that is not usable, that I think that is not good.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's just using them in different ways. I think Instagram is great for a brand to showcase their products or showcase how people are using, their products and their foods and their ingredients. If there's a brand on Instagram and they have a really good Instagram page, I may go there. Like when I was doing the cauliflower, story, I went to different brands on Instagram and saw, okay, this is what people are making with these, cauliflower, baking powders and cauliflower crusts, and it really helped to, sort of spark my creative juices and to decide which brands I was going to reach out to, which brands are doing the best marketing, which ones have the biggest followings. That gives you some insight into what consumers are looking for. And then on Twitter, it's more of sort of cultivating those relationships with journalists and talking to maybe the people who are running the media operations at different brands, and then also sending sort of following people and sending pitches and posting stories. It's less visual, obviously. Facebook, I think, is great for sort of groups. I tend not to use it too much. So yeah, I would say if you want to reach out to journalists, Twitter is usually the best place, and then Instagram is great for showcasing your brand and your following and your popularity.
I think one of the things for Instagram too, you guys were talking about earlier, is that there are things about organic that people don't understand. And so seeing what a farmer is doing or not doing is extremely valuable. You know, seeing that process. And so visually you can explain something, and then someone like Laura can turn around and say, and can go into the office and say, hey, we could show it like this, right? So I think in that way, because there are certain things that for me, my experience with learning about organic was going around the country and around the world and actually watching and learning about the organic process in different places. I could not read and learn that part. And so I think that's where Instagram plays a great role for you.
Yeah, I think that's a great point too. I did a story maybe a year or two ago about Sweetgreen, the restaurant salad chain. And I think I conversed with some of their PR people on Twitter and then email, and I followed them on Instagram and saw them posting pictures of the farmers in the fields, and they were talking about how they're sourcing their ingredients and what are their seasonal ingredients, and it was very effective for that.
So I think we had a gentleman over here. Great.
I don't need a microphone.
All right, then stand up.
Okay.
All right.
So I just had a question. As a grower shipper, how do we effectively tell the organic story without damaging the conventional products that we have too? Because it's very common for a grower shipper to have both.
Yeah.
And we feel that both have a lot of benefits. And oftentimes we have to start things conventionally and then transition them to organic. So
Yeah.
I would love some insight on that.
That's a great one.
That's a great story.
Yeah. Hey, there you go. Tell the story. Yeah, yeah. Okay, great. Perfect.
Yeah,
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, no, I love that story. I mean, so I think as a grower, so telling your story as a business, I think that's a great business story too. And so maybe it's pitching it to the right person, finding the right person to write that story. Maybe it's not Anaha to begin with, but maybe it's writing it from a business angle. I would have to dig in a little bit more on what that story is, but that's kind of fascinating to me. Because I think it's maybe one of the biggest conundrums with this industry too. And how do you make this story a little bit easier to tell and less confusing? Maybe that's is that the problem? Why is it so confusing for consumers? And maybe that's the story too. Why is this so damn confusing?
Yeah.
So have you had a problem with? Have you had any stories told about your business at all?
Not about our business specifically,
Uh-huh.
but just in talking with a lot of people that are my age that are consumers, they'll read the Dirty Dozen list and be like, "I'll never buy a conventional piece of produce. I'll only buy an organic piece." Or, "Why does your company grow conventional produce and organic produce?" So I get these questions posed to me, and the message I send to them is, all produce is healthy. It's really a matter of what you prefer, but is that the right message? I'm not sure. So I was just asking,
Yeah, no,
how
that's.
do you guys tell that story, or if you've been faced with some of these same questions from consumers?
I mean, I don't know. How would you answer that?
I mean, I think you're right. I think a lot of people, most people don't know that. Obviously, journalists don't know that. And I think, there's obviously a disconnect between, the industry and journalists and the media, where we don't know that much about the industry, just like the public doesn't know that much about the industry. It's sort of mysterious. And as I was saying earlier, I feel like other industries own their message. The dairy industry has done a remarkable job about owning their message and getting information out there and being ahead of the story and cultivating relationships with journalists, so that if they're doing stories or they're interested, they know exactly where to go to, who to talk to, and they have experts lined up. Same thing with all these other industries I mentioned earlier, the beverage industry, the egg industry, you name it. And I feel like there's this disconnect that the produce industry needs to try to sort of bridge that gap there. And I think if there's one takeaway from me today, it would be the industry needs to find a way to get its message across to journalists and the media more effectively, and really do a better job of strategizing there, because we're open to it, because this is what Americans are interested in, and we like to write stories that people are going to read, and this is people are interested in it, so we just need a better way to get that information from folks like yourself.
But it sounds like you're staying mum because of this conundrum, right? Yeah. So maybe that's the story you present, is we have this problem because we have both, and it takes us being conventional before we can go organic. I didn't know that, and to tell that story so that consumers know. And I mean, as a mom, I'm buying because, frankly, I can't afford to buy organic all the time. So I buy conventional when when I know that I can. Like, I'll buy broccoli conventional, and I'll buy apples organic or strawberries organic because EWG tells me that that's the better thing. And so, I do both. But I think to get that story, I think is a good one to get that out there. Don't stay mum, tell that story.
And it's a story that uniquely the produce industry can tell. So the analogy that I would give to you is that there are a number of companies that have both dairy and non-dairy options. I was just talking to an ice cream company about this part. And they said that they're having challenges with their communication because they want to attract the vegan consumer or the plant-based consumer with their new almond milk ice cream, but they don't want to turn around and say, hey, our 150-year-plus ice cream that was made from dairy, that there's anything wrong with it. But at the end of the day, I, as a dietitian, can tell you if you never had ice cream again, I'm fine on that part. What I can also tell you is if you never have produce again, you're not going to be a healthy individual. And so I think what Laura was laying out is really a great strategic approach of we need produce, right? Here's what it takes for everyone in this country to be consuming more produce. And by the way, we have an offering for everyone. And I think it's also that point that coming back that we started off with, which is you don't have to tell the message of organic as better than conventional. Conventional produce shouldn't be your target. Your target should be people not eating produce, right? How do we get more people eating produce? And so I think there's a lot of education, but I echo fivefold, and the reason I brought these fabulous individuals here today is that they do a much better job of telling you what I told you last year and want to continue to tell you, which is you can't be silent. You cannot be silent, because then if we're not telling the story, the confusion persists, and they could be an ally for you as opposed to this feeling like a challenged area. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that just one last point there. A great analogy would be the beverage industry, for example. So as a nutrition reporter and someone who covers health, there's obviously a lot of attention around sugar-sweetened beverages. There's multiple studies coming out. It's a big public health issue. And when you go to the beverage industry or companies like Coke and Pepsi, and you say, hey, there's so much controversy around these drinks, and they have all this sugar. What's your response to these public health experts? They say, look, we have a huge portfolio of products. We have full sugar beverages, and we have zero-calorie beverages. We sell water. We're just out here to give people options. For people who want to have their treat, we have that. People who want their water, we have that. If you want a zero-calorie drink, we have that. And how can you argue with that? They're just saying, look, we're giving people options. And I think it sounds like you're doing the same thing. You're just giving consumers options. If you want conventional produce, we have that. If you want organic produce, we have that. There's no reason to create tension between the two, because some people, at the end of the day, you should be just eating vegetables, as Ashley said. And for those who want organic, we have that. For those who want conventional for whatever reason, we have that. And I think that's the job of a media strategist or a PR person for the industry, is to work with reporters to let them know that this is your story. And it sounds like your particular story would be great, for example, for like the Wall Street Journal or some other financial news outlets. I'm more interested in like the nutrition perspective, but there's definitely, I think, a lot of outlets that would like to tell that story.
So have the Wall Street Journal first, and then you have Anahata do the follow-up on
and
that.
it's
Laura help
not
you
and it's
write
not
the
a
story.
negative
There you
story.
go.
It's just
Great.
it's a fascinating story that people think of. There's organic versus conventional, but that's not the reality, and most consumers and journalists don't know that.
Okay, so with 16 seconds, I feel very proud of us. We are going to wrap on time, allow everyone to get a sip of water, go to the bathroom. I just want to thank you guys so much for taking the time today and coming and sharing all of this knowledge. And thank you all for being here today. And I hope that you will go forth and talk to your respective entities at your companies, in your fields, and wherever. And let's do a better job with the communication. So thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.